I met Lena because of a piece of brass and a bad week. At that point I'd been in Savannah maybe 6 weeks, and I already looked like a man who'd made a questionable decision on purpose. I'd left a steady design-build job in Atlanta, rented this skinny old townhouse in a part of the historic district that was still half beautiful and half held together by patience, and told myself I was finally going to build something under my own name. The place had a little workshop out back, a brick courtyard, crooked floors, and about 12 problems I kept pretending were charming. That night the air felt heavy enough to drink. I was in the courtyard, covered in dust, staring at 2 cabinet panels that had warped just enough to ruin my whole schedule. A delivery had shown up wrong that morning. One client was already texting me like I personally controlled the calendar, and I was trying to level upper shelving with temporary bracing that I knew I was going to hate by sunrise. Then somebody tapped the side gate. Not knocked, tapped. Light, precise, like they already knew I was in a mood and weren't trying to make it worse. I almost ignored it. I actually stood there for a second with the drill still in my hand, thinking whoever that is can try again tomorrow. But the tap came once more, and I walked over and pulled the gate open. She was standing there in dark scrubs under a loose rain jacket, holding a slim brass mailbox slot cover in one hand. "I think this belongs to your place," she said. It was out by the shared path after the storm. She looked tired in a way that made regular tired seem fake. Not messy, not frazzled. Just worn down and still standing anyway. Her hair was pulled back, a few pieces loose around her face from the humidity, and her expression was calm enough that it almost made me more aware of how irritated I'd been 2 seconds earlier. "Thanks," I said. "I was wondering what that sound was earlier." She glanced past me into the courtyard. Not snooping, just noticing everything faster than most people did. "You're trying to level that top run without enough support on the left side," she said. I looked back at the shelving, then at her. "You usually diagnose strangers through gates?" That got the smallest almost smile. "No, just old houses. If Wood starts losing an argument, it gets obvious." I laughed once, mostly because I hadn't expected her to say that. That a professional opinion? Grew up around enough of them. She held out the brass piece. "Sorry for the late interruption." "It's fine." She nodded, then added, "Also, your second-floor rear railing is worse than you think." That made me look up toward the balcony. I looked back at her. "You've been inspecting my place?" "I pass it every day," she said, completely unbothered. "It leans." Then she gave a small, polite wave like that explained everything and turned toward the neighboring carriage house. That was how I met Lena Whitaker. Over the next few days I started noticing her without meaning to. The hours first. She left before dawn some mornings and came back after sunset most nights. More than once I saw her sit in her parked car for a full minute before going inside, like she needed that last quiet stretch before dealing with one more thing. I knew she worked in medicine because of the scrubs, but that was about it. A few evenings later I was hauling scrap wood toward the workshop when I saw her in the side path trying to manage 2 grocery bags and a folding garment rack at the same time. The narrow brick run between our places was barely wide enough for one person with decent balance, and halfway down it I saw the problem. A little package bench outside her back door had collapsed on one side. "You want a hand?" I asked. She let out a breath like she was too tired to pretend she didn't. "That depends. Are you going to judge how badly I've handled this?" "I do custom judgment at very fair rates." That got a real smile. Inside, her kitchen was neat but unfinished in a lived-in way. Not messy, just temporary. There was a stack of folded bedding on one chair, 2 paint samples on the counter, and a half-built plan happening in the spare room off the hall. "My aunt may need to stay with me for a while," she said. "I thought I had another week before I had to make this room functional." So the bench lost morale at the wrong time. Exactly. I reset the bench, tightened what I could, then fixed an interior door that had been sticking hard enough to leave marks on the floor. While I worked, we talked in pieces. Not the fake fast kind where 2 people try to prove they're charming. The useful kind. She told me she'd moved back to Savannah 3 years earlier. Her mother's side had been there forever, which apparently meant people still had opinions about where she should live, what she should attend, and how available she ought to be when something needed handling. She said it casually, but I could hear the weight of it. I told her I'd left a firm where I did good work in houses that never felt like mine, that I got tired of building beautiful things for other people while my own life kept looking temporary. She leaned against the counter and listened in a way that made me hear myself more clearly. When I finished, she walked me to the back door. "You were right about the railing," I said. "I usually am." That sounded very practiced. It is. The next morning I stepped into my courtyard and found a paper bag hanging from the gate latch. Inside was a bakery roll still a little warm and a folded note in neat handwriting. "For the man who rescued a hallway and a bench in one visit." Then, underneath that, "Also, your balcony railing really is a problem." It was a small thing, neighborly, technically, but I stood there longer than I should have, holding that note in my hand. Already knowing this didn't feel random anymore. I fixed the balcony rail 2 days later, mostly because I needed to, but also because once Lena Whitaker told me something on a property leaned, I didn't really trust myself to ignore it anymore. I was out there with a level and new anchors just after 6, working off the small rear landing, when I heard her voice from above. "You committed to the clamp too early." I looked up. She was standing on her own upstairs landing in pale blue scrubs, one hand around a glass of iced tea. Watching me like this had become part of her evening. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do you often review structural decisions before dinner?" "Only when they're happening in my line of sight." I leaned back and looked at the bracket. "It's temporary. That's what people say right before the temporary thing becomes permanent." She wasn't wrong, which was getting annoying in a way I liked more than I should have. A minute later she came down the narrow stair with a second glass and handed it to me through the gap in the railing. "You should trust the final anchor," she said. "You already know where it goes." I took the tea. That sounded less like hardware advice. She gave me that unreadable almost smile again. "Use it however you want." That became the pattern with us. Not some huge dramatic shift. Just a lot of ordinary contact that kept landing a little harder than ordinary contact should. She started stopping by the workshop in the evenings, usually still in scrubs, asking what I was working on like she actually cared about the answer. One night, it was a walnut crib restoration for a client who wanted to keep it in the family. Lena ran her fingers just above the sanded rail without touching it. "You kept the old marks," she said. "They're part of it. Most people would have tried to erase them. Most people don't hire me." She laughed at that, then asked 3 real questions in a row about joinery, finish, and why I'd rebuilt one side but not the other. She didn't admire things in that vague, polite way people do when they're trying to be supportive. She noticed decisions. She paid attention to what mattered inside the work. After that, I caught myself timing my own evenings around when she usually got home. I'd tell myself I was just finishing up, just wiping down tools, just eating late because I'd been busy. But really I knew exactly when her car usually turned into the lane behind the carriage house. Some nights we ended up eating takeout on the back steps between our places. Nothing fancy. Noodles, grilled fish. Once 2 overfilled paper trays from a place on Bull Street she claimed was the only restaurant in Savannah that understood how tired people wanted to eat. She'd kick off her shoes, tuck one foot under herself, and ask me things nobody had asked in years. "Why furniture first?" she said one night. "Because rooms don't feel real until there's something in them built for staying." She looked at me for a second after that. "That sounds practiced." "It's not." "No," she said quietly. "I don't think it is." The more time I spent in her kitchen, the more I noticed things that told on her in small ways. Old family silverware standing in a coffee mug by the stove instead of in a drawer. A stack of unopened framed photos on the floor by the spare room. Perfectly labeled pantry jars next to one cabinet door that still didn't close right. It felt like she had moved in physically a long time ago and emotionally only as far as necessary. I think she saw that I noticed without making a show of noticing. That mattered with her. Eventually I asked more about her family, and that was when the bigger picture started coming into view. Her mother's side had deep Savannah roots. The kind people mention without bragging because they don't have to. Boards, donors, dinners, old names attached to buildings. Lena didn't talk about any of it with drama. That was almost what made it feel heavier. She talked about it like whether you learn to live under. One evening she was standing in my workshop doorway while I worked on a dining table sketch, and she said, almost like she was mentioning a dentist appointment, "I have to go to a foundation dinner Friday. You sound thrilled." "I'm expected. That's not the same thing." "What foundation?" She named the hospital one, then added, "My uncle helped finance part of the neonatal wing, so my presence gets interpreted as useful." That sounds exhausting. It is exhausting. Friday night, I was coming back from a supplier when I saw a dark sedan parked out front of her place. A man was standing by the passenger door waiting for her. Good suit, easy posture, looked exactly like someone who had never once wondered if he belonged somewhere. When Lena came out, she looked beautiful in a simple dark dress, but not lit up, just composed. She saw me at almost the same time I saw her. "This is Andrew Mercer," she said when I got close enough. "Andrew, this is Ryan. He lives next door." Andrew gave me a smooth, polite handshake. "I've heard you're saving that townhouse one board at a time." "Trying to." Lena's face changed just slightly at that, like she was aware of how that sounded coming out of somebody else's mouth. Andrew opened the car door for her. She thanked him, then looked back at me for one extra beat before getting in. Not enough for anybody else to notice. Enough for me to stand there after they pulled away and feel stupid for how much it bothered me. I told myself the obvious things. She was allowed to have a life that had nothing to do with me. I was a neighbor, a new one, a man she shared takeout with because our schedules lined up and the back steps were convenient. Then the next morning she showed up at my gate holding 2 coffees and acting like she knew exactly how my brain had spent the last 12 hours. "You work early when you're irritated," she said. I took the cup from her. "That obvious?" "To me, yes." She followed me into the workshop and stood over the dining table sketch from the night before. After a minute, she tapped the page. "You did the seating layout first." "Yeah. Before the decorative edge." I shrugged. "That's how I think." She nodded slowly. "I know." That landed harder than it should have. I tried to sound casual when I said, "So, Andrew." She didn't pretend not to understand. "He's kind," she said. "He's known. He makes everyone around me relax." "That sounds like a strong recommendation." "For everyone else," she said. I looked up. She met my eyes and added, "Easy for everyone else is not always right for me." Then she took a sip of coffee like she hadn't just changed the entire temperature in the room. After that, whatever was between us got harder to explain away. I took her to see one of my renovation sites near the river a few days later, an old building where I had access to the upper roofline before the owners opened it back up. We stood up there at dusk with the whole city going soft around us, the air finally moving a little off the water. She folded her arms on the low wall and just looked out. "This is the first place that's felt quiet in months," she said. "It's still Savannah. Not like this." I didn't answer right away because I was too busy looking at her. She turned and caught me doing it, but didn't step back from it. That was the thing with Lena. She didn't rush toward anything. She just stopped pretending she hadn't already arrived there. A few nights later, she had another family dinner. Bigger, more formal, the kind that clearly came with seating decisions made 3 days in advance. She came back late. I was in the courtyard putting tools away when I heard the gate and turned. She still looked polished, but only in the technical sense. Her face had that flat, overheld calm people get when they've spent hours being exactly what everybody asked for. "How bad was it?" I said. She let out a breath and leaned one hand on the brick wall. "My mother made a toast about stability, about roots, about knowing who stands naturally inside your world. That feels subtle." It was not subtle. I stepped closer. "Lena." She shook her head once, then laughed without humor. "Do you know what the worst part is? Nobody even thinks they're being unfair. They think they're being thoughtful, efficient. Like if they place the right people near each other long enough, everyone can stop having difficult preferences." I was about to answer when her phone rang. She looked at the screen and closed her eyes for half a second. "I have to go in." "Now?" She nodded. "Now." She turned toward the path, then stopped and looked back at me. Like there was something she had almost said and couldn't finish carrying. "Ryan," she said. But the phone rang again in her hand, and that was it. She gave me one apologetic look, hurried through the gate, and disappeared into the dark toward her car. I stood there alone in the courtyard after she left, listening to the quiet settle back in. And that was the moment I had to admit it to myself. Whatever this was, it wasn't casual anymore. The problem was, I still had no idea whether something that felt this real in private had any chance at all once the rest of her world stepped into it. After that night, Lena didn't vanish. That would have been easier to understand. What she did instead was get careful. She still came and went next door. Still thanked me when I held the gate or moved something heavy or brought over a package that had landed on my steps by mistake. She still smiled. But the easy part of her, the part that had started showing up on the back steps with takeout and questions and that looked like she was already halfway inside a conversation before it started, that part pulled back. The texts got shorter. The evening drop-ins stopped. If we talked, it was usually while one of us was already doing something else. At first I told myself she was just overloaded. That much was true. Her Aunt Vivian had moved in after rehab, and between the hospital and the family pressure and the fact that she seemed to be the person everyone quietly built their plans around, she looked worn thinner every week. So I didn't push. I helped carry in a dresser for Vivian one Saturday morning. Fixed the loose latch on the side cabinet in Lena's kitchen. Replaced a bad wheel on a little rolling cart her aunt used in the spare room. Lena was warm, grateful, perfectly herself on the surface. But something had changed in the way she stood near me, like she was measuring distance now instead of forgetting it. The worst part was that none of it was dramatic enough to fight with. One afternoon Vivian caught me outside while I was unloading trim from the truck. "You've been such a calming influence," she said. "Lena leans on capable people when life gets noisy. Always has." She meant it kindly. I knew that. Vivian was sharp, funny, and too observant to be fake about anything. But I stood there with a bundle of oak in my arms and heard one part louder than the rest. A calming influence. Capable people. Like I'd been useful. Steady. Convenient in a season where she needed one less thing to fall apart. And once that idea got in my head, it started attaching itself to everything. Maybe that was all this had ever been. Private comfort. A man next door with working hands and decent timing. Somebody safe to sit beside while the rest of her life pressed in from every side. I started pulling back too. Not to punish her. Mostly to protect whatever pride I still had left. I stayed later at job sites. Kept the workshop doors shut more often. When I heard her come home, I stopped finding reasons to be in the courtyard at exactly that moment. It felt childish, but it also felt necessary. Then I got a shot at a major hotel commission. A restored boutique property near the river needed custom wood interiors, and it was the kind of job that could put my name in the right rooms without me having to pretend I belonged there first. I showed up for the site meeting in a clean button-down, plans under my arm, trying to think like a man whose life was moving forward. Halfway through the walkthrough, I turned a corner and saw Lena. She was there with a small hospital development group discussing some charity partnership the hotel wanted tied to its opening season. Andrew Mercer was with them. So was a woman I recognized from one of those Savannah families that always seemed to own either land, events, or both. Lena saw me immediately, and in front of everybody she went composed. Not cold, not rude, just formal. "Ryan," she said with that polite public smile. "I didn't realize you were on this project." "I'm bidding it," I said. Andrew stepped in smoothly, shook my hand again, started talking about craftsmanship and preservation like we were all standing inside the world he'd expected to see. Lena stayed pleasant, measured, unreadable. Nothing in her face gave away back steps, rooftop silence, iced tea through a railing, any of it. That hurt more than if she'd been harsh. Because harsh would have been emotion. This felt intentional. That night I worked in the shop until way past when I should have stopped. Around midnight, I killed the lights and stepped outside into the narrow dark between our places. That was when I saw her. She was sitting alone on the rear staircase in scrubs, one hand around a bottle of water, Her shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen when anyone else was around. Not crying. Not falling apart. Just past the point where she had anything left to perform with. I stood there for a second, then walked over and sat one step below her. We didn't speak right away. Finally she said, "You've been avoiding me." I let out a breath. "You noticed. I notice everything with you. That's part of the problem." I looked up at her then. She was staring straight ahead into the courtyard shadows. "I pulled back because things got louder," she said. "At work. At home. With my mother. With everyone acting like my life would be easier if I just stopped making it complicated." "And am I the complicated part?" She gave a tired laugh. "No. You're the part that made the rest of it feel impossible to ignore." I said nothing. She looked down at me then. Really looked. "Ryan, being with you stopped feeling harmless." That landed deep enough that I forgot whatever careful answer I'd been holding. She kept going, quieter now. "At first it was easy to tell myself you were just relief. The person next door who understood practical things, who made a room calmer the second he started fixing something in it. But that's not why I noticed you." I turned toward her fully. She rested her forearms on her knees. "A month before the mailbox slot night, I saw you in your courtyard taking down those original cypress shelves. You weren't throwing them out. You were cleaning them, stacking them, trying to save what could still be saved." I remembered that day. It had been hot, miserable, and I'd assumed nobody was paying attention. "My grandfather was a preservation carpenter," she said. "He used to say you could tell a man's mind by what he thought was worth saving." Something in my chest shifted. She went on. "Then one of the contractors at the hospital mentioned a furniture guy from Atlanta had moved in next door. Said you'd left secure firm work to build something honest on your own. So no, you were not just useful during a hard time. I was already paying attention." I sat there for a second, letting that reach all the places the last few weeks had bruised. "Then why the hotel today?" I asked. "Why act like I was just somebody you'd met twice?" Her jaw tightened. "Because my mother has a benefit coming up, and Andrew's presence beside me is being treated like a settled idea. Because I was tired. Because if I let anything show, everybody would see exactly where my attention goes, and I was not ready to fight that battle in a ballroom and then go save tiny lives at 7 the next morning." That sounded so much like her that I believed it immediately. She leaned back against the railing and closed her eyes for 1 second. "I can't keep living half in one life and half in another." I looked at her, really looked at her, and understood that whatever happened next needed to be clean. Not convenient. Not blurred. So I said the only thing that felt honest. "Whatever you decide. I'd rather lose honestly than keep doing this halfway." She opened her eyes and held my gaze. Neither of us moved. But after weeks of feeling like I was standing outside something with no shape, that was the first moment it felt like the truth had finally entered the room. Lena made the first real move herself. The benefit was at one of those restored coastal houses outside the center of town. The kind with long windows, perfect hedges, and rooms that looked like they'd been arranged for people who had never once sweated through a shirt carrying lumber in August. I wasn't there for the main event. That was her world, not mine. But I knew what night it was, and I knew enough by then to understand that whatever came after would matter. She told me later how it happened. Not with a scene. Not with some dramatic speech that left half the room frozen around a drink tray. That wasn't Lena. She said it was quieter than that, which somehow made it bigger. Andrew was there, of course. Her mother had apparently placed things the way her mother always placed things, carefully enough that nobody could accuse her of arranging anything while everybody understood exactly what was being arranged. At some point during the evening, Lena stopped helping the moment along. She didn't drift toward Andrew when expected. Didn't fill in the picture everyone preferred. And afterward, when her mother tried to speak in that calm, polished way that really meant now is the time to be reasonable, Lena said no. Not loudly, just clearly. No, she was not going to keep accepting a life because it made everyone else more comfortable. No, she was not confused. And no, kindness and history and convenience were not the same thing as love. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect from people too controlled to make a mess in public. Cool voices. Disappointed faces. a kind of elegant frost. The next afternoon Lena came through the side gate and found me in the workshop sanding down the edge of a cabinet frame. I looked up, and the second I saw her face, I knew something had shifted. "Well?" I said. "Well?" she said, leaning against the doorframe. "It turns out people respond badly when you decline to be positioned like decorative furniture." I set the sander down. "How bad?" "My mother is wounded. 2 of my cousins are pretending to be concerned when they're actually thrilled to have something to discuss. Andrew was decent about it. That part didn't surprise me. He seems like he would be. He said he'd rather be respected honestly than accepted by momentum." I nodded once. "That's fair." She looked at me for a second longer, then said, "My mother wants to meet you." That would have scared me more a month earlier. By then, I was too tired of blurred lines to want anything but the truth. Margaret Whittaker came over 2 days later. Afternoon light, perfect posture, that quiet Savannah elegance that made a plain question sound like a social exam. Vivian was upstairs resting. Lena stayed in the next room for the first few minutes, close enough to hear if she needed to, far enough that this was clearly meant to happen between me and her mother first. Margaret didn't insult me. In a way, that would have been simpler. She just asked direct questions in a tone that made every answer feel like it was being weighed for durability. How stable was my business really? Did I understand the kind of demands Lena's work placed on her? Was I asking her to step into uncertainty just because uncertainty happened to feel noble from where I stood? I answered the only way I knew how. I told her I wasn't offering Lena some grand fantasy. I wasn't asking her to blow up her life and disappear into mine. I told her I knew exactly how hard she worked, how much people leaned on her, and that the only thing I was offering was honesty, steadiness, and a life where she didn't have to keep splitting herself into acceptable pieces for everyone else. Margaret held my eyes a long time after that. Then she said, "Unpredictability is expensive." I nodded. "So is living the wrong life on purpose." She didn't smile, but something in her expression changed, just slightly, like she hadn't expected me to stay that still. The part that mattered most came later, though, and it had nothing to do with her family. A few nights after that, Lena came home from the hospital looking like she'd hit the edge of something and kept walking anyway. She dropped her bag on the kitchen chair and stood at the counter without moving. I didn't ask for details right away. I just opened her fridge, found what I could work with, and started cooking. She sat on a stool and watched me like she was only halfway back from work. After a while she said, "I'm tired of being the reliable center of everyone else's plans." I turned the heat down under the pan. "Then stop volunteering for the role." She gave me a look. "That's very simple of you." "Not simple, just true." She rubbed one hand over her face. "At work, I understand the pressure. It means something there. But outside of work," she let out a breath. "Outside of work, I've let people treat me like I should be grateful for a life that already looks right from a distance." I set a plate in front of her and leaned against the counter across from her. "You don't owe anyone a life built from obedience disguised as elegance," I said. She stared at me after that, quiet and tired and fully there. Then she nodded once, like something in her had finally stopped arguing with itself. After that, things didn't magically become easy. They just became honest. Her mother didn't transform overnight, but she stopped freezing the air every time my name came up. Andrew stepped back with more grace than most people would have managed. Vivian got stronger and found a smaller townhouse nearby, close enough to stay in Lena's life without Lena having to carry every piece of daily logistics herself. And my hotel commission came through, which meant for the first time since moving to Savannah, I wasn't building on hope alone anymore. The biggest difference was Lena. She started coming by the workshop when she didn't need anything fixed. She'd sit on the stool near the window, still in scrubs, and ask about real things. Whether I'd ever expand into architectural millwork full-time. Whether the courtyard could handle raised herb beds without ruining the drainage. Whether 2 old houses could be made to function like one if the person doing it understood the difference between preserving character and protecting inconvenience. That was Lena's version of talking about a future. Practical first, but no less real. By early spring, I finally fixed the shared side gate properly. For months it had stuck and scraped and needed a shoulder against it at exactly the right angle. I pulled the frame, corrected the sag, reset the hinges, and got it to swing cleanly both ways. That evening she came through after work, one hand still on the latch, and stopped when she felt it open without resistance. "You fixed it," she said. "I corrected the frame," I told her. "The hardware was compensating for the wrong problem." She smiled slowly. "That sounds like a lesson people learn too late." I stepped closer. "Probably." She looked at me for one quiet second, then said it plainly, because that was what we had earned by then. "What began as attention and comfort became love somewhere along the way," she said. "And the reason I pulled back wasn't doubt about you. It was fear of how much I'd have to disrupt to choose you properly. I felt that all the way through me, but when I answered, my voice still came out steady. I never needed easy," I said. "Only real." She held my gaze. So I asked, "Are you done standing in two places at once?" And she said, "Yes." A few months later, the two rear courtyards were basically one space. Not merged in some flashy way, just opened up enough to live honestly. Work table on one side, climbing jasmine on the brick, herbs and raised boxes Lena insisted were purely practical until she started fussing over them more than I did. Vivian came by often. Margaret even stopped by once and, after looking at